Welcome to Moments in History channel. Imagine it's June 18th, 1815. The fields near a small Belgian village called Waterloo are soaked from a night of relentless rain. On this muddy ground, the fate of Europe is about to be decided. This is the story of the Battle of Waterloo, the final epic showdown that brought an end to the Napoleonic era. To understand how we got here, we have to rewind 100 days. Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who had conquered most of Europe, was supposed to be in exile on the tiny island of Elba, but Napoleon was never one to stay put. He escaped, landed in France, and rallied the nation behind him once more. The monarchies of Europe, who had just breathed a sigh of relief, were now in a panic. They formed the Seventh Coalition, a massive alliance determined to stop Napoleon for good. Napoleon, ever the brilliant strategist, knew his only chance was to strike first and strike hard. His plan was simple but audacious: invade Belgium, defeat the British and Prussian armies separately before they could unite, and force the coalition to the negotiating table. He gathered his French army, a force of about 73,000 veteran soldiers, fiercely loyal to their emperor. This army, known as the Armée du Nord, was a formidable machine of war, boasting elite infantry, fearsome cavalry, and a powerful artillery corps. Napoleon was counting on speed and a decisive blow. Standing in his way was an Anglo-allied army of around 68,000 men. At its head was Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington. Wellington was a cautious, methodical commander, a perfect foil to Napoleon's aggressive style. He was a master of defensive warfare, and he knew the terrain around Waterloo intimately. He chose his battleground carefully, positioning his troops along a long, low ridge called Mont-Saint-Jean. This ridge would give his men a crucial defensive advantage. But Wellington wasn't alone. Marching to his aid was the Prussian army, about 50,000 strong, led by the fiery 72-year-old Field Marshal Gebhard von Blücher. Blücher had a personal vendetta against Napoleon and had promised Wellington he would come. For Napoleon, this was a race against time. He had to crush Wellington's army before Blücher's Prussians could arrive and tip the scales. The entire battle would hinge on this simple, brutal calculation. The morning of June 18th was delayed. The ground was too muddy from the previous night's storm for Napoleon to effectively move his cannons and cavalry. He decided to wait for the ground to dry, a decision that would prove to be one of the most critical mistakes of his career. Every hour he waited was an hour closer to the Prussians' arrival. Finally, around 11:30 a.m., the battle began. Napoleon opened with a massive artillery barrage, a grand battery of over 80 cannons, hoping to soften up Wellington's lines. The sound was deafening, a constant, earth-shattering roar. Following the bombardment, the French infantry launched its first major assault, targeting a key fortified farmhouse on Wellington's right flank called Hougoumont. Napoleon thought a diversionary attack on Hougoumont would draw Wellington's reserves, but he underestimated the determination of the British and German defenders. The fighting around this cluster of buildings became a brutal, savage battle within the battle. Soldiers fought hand-to-hand in the courtyards, orchards, and chapel. Despite repeated, overwhelming French attacks, the defenders of Hougoumont held on, tying up thousands of French troops for the entire day. This sideshow became a critical drain on Napoleon's resources. While the fight for Hougoumont raged, Napoleon launched his main attack on Wellington Center. Thousands of French infantrymen, marching in dense columns, advanced up the muddy slope of Mont-Saint-Jean. At the crest of the ridge, Wellington had hidden most of his infantry on the reverse slope, protecting them from the worst of the French artillery fire. As the French columns reached the top, Wellington gave the famous command, "Up guards and at 'em!" Suddenly, his infantry rose, unleashing devastating volleys of musket fire at point-blank range. The French columns, packed tightly together, were perfect targets. They faltered, their momentum broken. The British infantry, firing in disciplined lines, repelled the assault. On the left, another fortified farm, La Haye-Sainte, also became a focal point of intense fighting. It changed hands multiple times, a slaughterhouse that consumed regiments from both sides. Seeing his infantry stalled, Napoleon decided to commit his cavalry. In one of the most iconic and tragic moments of the battle, Marshal Ney, known as the bravest of the brave, led a massive charge of nearly 10,000 French cavalrymen against Wellington's center. It was a breathtaking spectacle, a sea of glittering helmets and breastplates, horses thundering across the field. But Wellington was prepared. He ordered his infantry to form squares. These were dense formations of men, several ranks deep, with bayonets pointing outwards in all directions. The squares were like human hedgehogs, virtually unbreakable by cavalry. The French horsemen swirled around these islands of infantry, charging again and again, but they couldn't break them. They were shot to pieces by musket fire and artillery, their energy and numbers dwindling with each failed charge. Without infantry support, the greatest cavalry charge in history was a glorious but futile disaster. By late afternoon, Napoleon's army was exhausted. His men had been fighting for hours, making repeated costly attacks against a stubborn defense. And then, on the horizon to the east, Napoleon's worst fear materialized. Dark blue uniforms. The Prussians had arrived. Blücher, true to his word, was here to finish the dance. The first Prussian corps slammed into Napoleon's right flank, forcing him to divert precious troops, including his veteran Old Guard, to hold them off. The battle was now being fought on two fronts. Napoleon was caught in a vice. Time had run out. With pressure mounting and his lines weakening, Napoleon made his final desperate gamble. He committed his last reserve, the elite of the elite, the Imperial Guard. These were the legendary soldiers who had never known defeat, the personal guardians of the Emperor. Their advance was meant to be the decisive blow that would shatter Wellington's exhausted line. In the fading light of the evening, the Imperial Guard marched up the same muddy slope, drums beating, eagles held high. The fate of the battle rested on their shoulders. Wellington rode along his lines, encouraging his weary men for one last effort. As the Guard crested the ridge, they were met with a storm of grape shot and a wall of British musketry. For the first time in their history, the unbeatable Imperial Guard hesitated. They stopped. Then they began to fall back. A cry went through the French ranks, a cry of disbelief and despair. La Garde recule! The Guard retreats! The psychological impact was devastating. If the Imperial Guard could be beaten, then all was lost. The French army, which had fought so bravely all day, broke. The retreat turned into a rout. As the French fled the field, Wellington and Blücher met near the Inn of La Belle Alliance, a symbolic meeting that sealed the coalition's victory. The battle was over. The fields of Waterloo were a horrific sight, covered with tens of thousands of dead and wounded men and horses. It was a victory, but a brutal one. As Wellington himself later said, "Nothing except a battle lost can be half so melancholy as a battle won." The Battle of Waterloo wasn't just a military victory, it was the end of an era. Napoleon's 100 days were over. He abdicated for a second and final time, and was exiled to the remote island of St. Helena, where he would die 6 years later. The Napoleonic Wars, which had ravaged Europe for over a decade, were finally at an end. The victory at Waterloo reshaped the map of Europe and ushered in a period of relative peace and stability, often called the Pax Britannica. It confirmed Great Britain's status as the world's leading power and established a new balance of power that would last for nearly a century. This single day of battle had a profound impact, closing one of the most dramatic chapters in history and setting the stage for the modern world. Thank you for watching. If you found this dive into history fascinating, please hit that like button, subscribe to Moments in History channel for more epic stories, and let us know in the comments what battle you'd like to see us cover next.